I'm proposing to you to not use the term DEI because DEI is not your
I'm going
term.
to use it all day,
But that
every
DEI was not
day,
invented.
Ron.
So,
I don't care.
by the way,
McKinsey's, I
they would probably
co-opted,
call you
Ron.
racist for
Ron,
co-opting their term
Rob,
and
I
not saying
co-opted industries. Why did you have a problem?
Nike wanted a quota pledge to ensure
Rob,
30%
why
of
did
their
you have a
U.S.
problem?
workforce. What
Why
you are
do you have
saying.
a problem with that?
Okay, you're contradicting yourself. You're saying you agree with them, then you're saying they're
No, I'm
virtue
saying,
signaling.
you asked me, why do they say it? Why not say an alternative, give an alternative sentence? I'm saying because they're virtue signaling.
So you disagree with having a racial goal?
No.
Stop fixating on race and gender as your goals.
You know what, Rob? If you were better at all that than they are, you'd have 500 employees. You've got a business. Why isn't your business bigger?
Well, all right. Hello, Mark.
What's up, Rob? How are you?
Good. You?
Another day in paradise.
Thanks for agreeing to do this.
Yeah, I'm happy to. Looking forward to it.
I'm surprised you said yes.
Why? We can disagree on things. I like people who disagree with me.
So a bit of background between you and me. So we had a fairly long email exchange a couple years ago on COVID mandates, mRNA vaccine side effects, the bioethics of mandates, and the government response to COVID. And I never talked about this really publicly up until Joe mentioned on his show, on his podcast, Joe Rogan. So he organized that sort of informal email debate after you guys had a pretty strong disagreement on COVID, and you were criticizing him pretty heavily on his COVID commentary, and then you guys were going back and forth, and Joe asked me to chime in, and we had a long correspondence.
Yeah, he hasn't talked to me since.
I'd love to get into that and
Sure.
what we see in retrospect, and if your opinion has changed on some of those things,
No.
and what we make of all that.
Yeah, it really hasn't.
But okay. Well, we'll have an interesting debate then on that. But first, I thought we'd open the discussion on DEI and wokeness.
Mhm.
That appears to be one of a few major topics where we have a lot of disagreement on. And I'd really like this conversation to be a good faith effort to try and talk about some of these very contentious hot button issues,
Sure.
which a lot of people have strident disagreement on. And from what I've seen from you, we disagree on a lot of these things. And so I'd love to see if we can find common ground, or if someone can change someone's mind. But
Yeah,
from what I've seen,
I don't know what your positions on all these things are, but I'm happy to share mine.
yeah. So we can start with DEI and wokeness. And so from what I've seen from you on this topic, I sense there's a lot of confusion on your part, ideological confusion on this issue. And I see you advocating for a certain kind of DEI that is not really what DEI is about. And you articulate some of these very high-minded, sometimes very noble visions of DEI being about including people, the importance of helping marginalized communities, having diverse perspectives in particular. You've talked a lot about that. So why don't you first articulate your view on DEI
Sure.
and why you support
DEI
it?
is really simple. It's what I've used in my businesses. Diversity is going out there and looking and including diverse populations in your hiring practices, looking where other people don't look, which I think is smart for any business to do. You know, most companies don't spread a wide net as they look for potential employees. And the wider the net you can spread, the more diverse that net you can spread, you're going to find, diamonds in the rough. You're going to find better people because, in many cases, you may be the only one looking where other people aren't. So that's diversity to me, looking where other people aren't and finding the most qualified candidates, always based on merit. Equity means once you hire somebody, put them in a position to succeed. Very, very simple. And inclusion means I don't care what they look like, what they call themselves, how they gender themselves, whoever you are, I hired you because you were the best and we're going to respect you in the workplace. That's DEI. That's, it's worked for me well in business. When I go out and talk to organizations about DEI, that's the message that I convey. Nobody really disagrees with me. When I talk to CEOs about it, they look at it and say, that's the right way to do it. That's what we're trying to do. When I talk to, any type of company that, wants to be as successful as possible, that's why they bring me in to talk. They don't bring me in to talk philosophy. They don't bring me in to talk about the law. They bring me in to say, okay, we want to be more profitable. We want to run a better
Yeah.
company. You were very supportive of DEI. Tell me why. And I tell them just what I told you.
So the problem with what you're saying is that that's not what DEI is. At least that's not. First of all, that's not what the activists and the people who support DEI
Okay, so,
say it is,
so let's
and
stop
also
right
the
there.
conservative critics
So
also.
what activists do has nothing to do. DEI is part of a business, right?
Uh-huh.
It's for business, correct?
And universities.
Well, that's different, right? I'm talking as it relates to businesses.
Okay.
So, universities are one world, and we can talk about those separately. And I've always said, what happens in a university as it applies to what they do, there's a whole different world. But no one gives a shit what an activist thinks when they're running their business. No one cares. I couldn't even name any of the activists because I don't care, and they don't matter. Never have mattered to a business, never will matter to a business, because what matters is the bottom line. If you can align the interests of your company and what creates profits with your employees and make it so your employees like coming to work, the culture's good, and people, feel like they can contribute to the overall goal.
Yeah.
That's what DEI contributes to. It's really straightforward and simple.
There's a few problems with what you're saying. First of all, optics matters in a business, and from a lot of your positions on DEI, like the culture has changed in the last several months, even with the election of Trump. Culture is definitely moving rightward. The popularity of podcasts and independent media, a lot of conservative voices now are more and more getting more and more attention. But there's, of course, been this perception, especially in the wake of George Floyd, at the height of this hysteria on race relations in America, that I think and many others have observed to be fairly skewed from the reality of what is happening with race relations. There has been this problem and this perception among CEOs that we have to cave to these, woke far left dictates and positions on increasing diversity and inclusivity and equity at their companies. And if they don't do that, or if for whatever reason they come under the spotlight for not having equal representation among certain race groups, only certain ones and not other ones, weirdly enough, but we can talk about that. But if we don't have equal representation among certain groups, say men and women or Black Americans, 13% of our company isn't Black Americans, then we could come under the spotlight and be attacked as being racist. That's a real problem. And do you see that as being a real issue?
How often do you look at EEOC documents?
Okay, not often.
Ever?
It's been a while.
Never? So lots of talk about.
I wrote a lot about race in 2020, 2021. I haven't written a lot about race relations and companies in the last couple of years, but go on.
I continue to look at EEOC documents because, not all companies publish them. Most, I think a big chunk have to file them. And when you look at the EEOC documents, they give you real data. And they tell you not what a company talks about, not what people talk about as it relates to a company, but exactly what they do. And so you get to see they're hiring by demographics. Now they've changed the rules now with Caroline Lucas there, but and removed some things, but it was all right there. And so all the companies that got shit for, hey, your DEI program for hiring, you set these quotas, the numbers don't match the narrative. And so that's what I paid attention to. And look, it was financially rewarding to call out companies. When I say financially rewarding, not that people were getting paid when they did it, but it built an audience and it built, it built interest in programming and podcasts and the like, and that leads to sponsors and downloads and all that. But what I'm telling you, Rob, is when I look at the EEOC data, you don't see a reflection that companies introduce quotas, because those big companies also have legal counsel. They have general counsel and legal departments that know that quotas are illegal. Now that doesn't mean they can't set goals, doesn't mean they can't talk to goals. And where you're right is that there's a lot of virtue signaling that goes on depending on what happens. right? During COVID, and 5-6 years ago, there was a ton of virtual signaling that we want to hire more, we want to set our goals at this level, and we want to go out and try to, just improve. What's the right word? And we want to, try to understand how we can make our companies more profitable using these approaches. And so lots of talk. And now it's the opposite, right? It's like, no, we don't do that. We don't do DEI. We don't do any of that stuff, and they change the literature. They do the search and replace, and they remove things. They remove titles, again, on the corporate side. But culturally,
Yeah.
it's not really changing.
So
Culturally, it's not changing at all because they know it's good for business.
okay, so I'm disagreeing with some things you're saying, and I'll circle back on that in a second. But are you agreeing with me that racial quotas are wrong? Because
They're illegal. They're
well,
always wrong because they're
yes, yeah,
illegal.
it violates
They're illegal.
It violates
And
Title
every
7
every
Civil
company,
Rights
every
Act.
big company knows that. But what happens is you get people who say, "Look at that company. They said, it's like that video that what's his name, James, whatever his name is,
James
that
Lindsay.
walks around with the video camera, right?" And he said, they had a guy from IBM saying, and I'm doing this from memory, we're going to have, here's our goal, here's our mission. We want to have, representation so that we reflect America. Okay, they didn't say they're not. That doesn't mean it's a quota. That doesn't mean they're hiring somebody who's less qualified, because at some point when you hire people that are less qualified, the company suffers, even big companies, because it's not just a matter of can they absorb somebody who's incompetent or less capable, they're big. It's more, nobody wants to work with them, and particularly, 5-6 years ago when people were getting checks and, it was in companies were paying to keep people, that it just wasn't happening the way it was being described. So both sides try to virtue signal, and it's the same thing is happening now. Oh no, don't do DEI, and we don't do that stuff anymore, when they don't really change anything.
So in 2020, as everyone knows, a number of high-profile companies made these racial Black Lives Matter affiliated pledges. I pulled up a few examples. Everyone knows about this, but Starbucks, Meta, Pfizer, increasing minority representation to 30%, doubling the number of Black and Latinx.
Did they do it? Did you look at the EEOC numbers to see if they did it?
So a lot of these companies after walked this back, and we can get to that, but I'm just talking about the concept here of having these goals. Companies like Pfizer, Microsoft, and Starbucks.
Goal is not a
American
quota,
Airlines,
Rob.
United Airlines.
Goal is not a quota.
Yes, I'm granting that. So are you saying you support that goal, or we want to double the amount of Black senior leaders at this company, or we want to double the BIPOC, whatever the hell that means,
to make that
representation in our company?
In the United States of America, and that's the way capitalism works. If you want to make a product for $10 and sell it for $3 and lose money on every sale, that is up to you. If you
That's not what I'm talking about. I'm asking for your opinion.
You think, you want people, when it comes to vaccines, people get to make their individual choices. But when it comes to companies, they don't get to make their individual choices.
That's not what I'm saying. No, I'm just asking for your opinion.
Okay.
Right? Is it ethical and sensible and maybe even feasible to have these goals of you want to double your Black employees at some physics lab or chemistry lab, or in this pharmaceutical company, we want double the amount of women, for example?
It depends on the company and the culture and the organization. If you have no women in the company at all, right, and you want, you decided that that's a mistake, that you historically have made mistakes. If you have no Black employees because historically, you excluded Black employees for whatever reason, and you just hadn't got whatever, right? Okay, you make the decision to try to improve, to go out and hire and find people that are the most qualified people, and hopefully they're Black. And so you set a goal. You're going to interview, the way I looked at that is, before maybe you interviewed 10 people to get one. And that one, you typically went through the same places to hire, and those places were all predominantly white. And that's more likely because, like you said, only 13% of the population is Black. So if you spread your wings and spread the net so that you're going someplace where there's, now you're interviewing or going where, there are more black candidates. Well, there's an increasing likelihood that out of all those black candidates, you're going to find somebody that's the most qualified. Same with women, same with any demographic. You want left-handed people, if you interview enough left-handers, one of them is going to be the most qualified. And
But this is not what we're talking about. This is not
yes,
what
it
these
is. That's the way business works, Rob. That is the way business works. You go out there and you
that's
set
what you're saying.
goals.
That's not what Starbucks and Amazon and Meta, again, some of these
But
companies have
Rob,
walked us
you
back
haven't looked at
recently. That's not
go
what they said.
Google right now. Go Google their EEOC reports and see what they actually did. What was the net result of their actions?
Yes, a lot of companies walked back their
No,
these
I didn't say they walk back. It's hard to do those things. You can set all the goals you want. Doesn't make them quotas. They're not dumb. They know quotas are illegal. You can't give a preference to somebody based off their color, race, creed, whatever it may be. That is illegal. But if you go to, instead of just going to a school that happens to be 97% white, you go to a school that happens to be 97% black, do you think that's wrong?
If they're solely picking people based on merit.
No, that's not what I asked you. That's not what I asked you, right? Is it okay to go to, is it okay to go to a school that happens to be 100% black? Can you recruit there?
There's nothing inherently wrong with that.
Right. That's what I've said. That's what I told you. That is what DEI is. As long as you're going out and hiring. So if all of a sudden someone says, Starbucks, whoever says, we need to increase the number of black employees that we have. And to do that, we're not going to use quotas. We're going to evaluate and analyze where we've been looking to find candidates for our company. And we're going to go extend the number of candidates, go to places now that instead of being predominantly white, because, just the numbers say that if, 70% of the workforce is white, then where you go to hire, most likely it's going to be white. And if 13% is black of the population, most likely the places you're going to go to look for candidates are going to be predominantly white. Are you going to agree with that?
The problem is you're talking about something very different than what these companies have talked about.
I'm telling you how business works, Rob. Let me get to the whole point. So I asked you a question again. Do you agree that most places companies are going to interview or look for candidates other than online, right? That you are going to see predominantly white people apply if that source of candidates is predominantly white. That's just the way it goes. The numbers are the numbers. The math is the math. And if you go now, and particularly if you haven't done it in the past, if you're like, damn, why don't we interview at HBCUs? You go to HR. Hey, HR, why have we never interviewed at HBCUs? Why? Well, I don't know.
Okay.
Haven't gone to those schools. Okay, so now CEO makes the decision. We are going to go to more HBCUs. That is going to increase the number of black, maybe Hispanic applicants. We're going to go to more community colleges. That's going to increase the number of black.
So this is all independent of race. This is not what DEI
Yes,
advocates.
it is. This is exactly what DEI is. Just because you don't like it, doesn't mean it's not right, Rob. It's exactly what it is. And so what happens is when you expand your net, so you include people who don't look like you, right?
That's great. That's great.
As long as you hire the most qualified person. Now, let me tell you something else. Doing that is hard. It's not easy for companies to do that.
Casting a wider net is perfectly reasonable.
Right.
Okay?
But it's hard to do because companies just aren't built that way. And so when they set goals, when American Airlines, United, Starbucks, all the companies you mentioned set goals, that's what they're referring to. They're saying we're going to cast a wider net by going to places we haven't been before that have a greater population of demographics that we really don't have here. That doesn't mean we're going to hire them if they're not qualified.
First of all, these companies have not made that clear at all. And just to be
different issue. But if you listen to the quarterly earnings conference calls, they're a lot clearer on these things.
There's some confusion about terms here, and you already know this, and this does not need to be repeated. But just in case people aren't aware, companies like Starbucks, they had their quota pledge to achieve 30% BIPOC representation and 40% in retail roles by 2025. Pfizer wanted to reach 32% minority representation at VP level and above by 2025. They walked this back eventually.
But
Meta
why did
also
you have
had
a
these.
problem with that? Why did you have a problem?
Nike wanted a quota pledge to ensure
But
30%
Rob,
of
why did
their
you have a
U.S.
problem?
workforce
Why
was
did you
Black
have a
or Latinx by 2025. So,
Rob?
that's different from what
Why
you
do
are
you have
saying,
a problem with that? If that's a
because
goal, not a quota, that's a goal.
that's a goal. Because and this goes to the deeper problem. I still, what you're talking about, first of all, about expanding the net of people to select for your company, that's a noble goal. And if you're not already doing
Right.
that's a big issue.
That's what
If
I've
you're
always argued. That's always been
if
my definition of DEI. Always.
but that's not what DEI people are saying. Okay,
No, no,
and you'll disagree with them. So then this is where we need different terms. Maybe you
no,
need to
no, but
maybe you
Rob,
need to stop using the word DEI, because when
Rob,
people say
companies are
DEI, they're
dumb.
referring to racial and gender and sexual orientation specific goals, and in some cases quotas.
Okay, if it's a quota, they can just say quota, even though they know it's illegal, right? But if it's goals, right, you would see progressions in their EEOC reports, right? If they were able, if what you were saying is true, and they're not hiring specifically based off of merit, but the tie goes to the BIPOC, right, the person of color, or by whatever it may be, right? You would see that in their numbers. You would see that in general employment, and
Right.
you just don't.
Okay.
You just don't. We're not seeing these reports, and we didn't in the past, where all of a sudden these companies, the unemployment rate for people of color drops because everybody's hiring for the reasons you've said, right? You're just not seeing it. If that were the case and they were getting an advantage because they're only 13% of the population, you probably should see an unemployment rate less within white collar jobs than you saw for white Americans, right? If it was so prevalent. Don't you agree? Because there would be a numerical impact on the final numbers.
So we're getting into another adjacent issue, which is about the outcomes.
You want to have a conversation?
Yeah.
You agree that you would see an impact on the numbers
So,
if people of color were advantaged. You would see that, because when it's the law of small numbers, when they're only 13% of the population, and you have all these huge companies that you say are giving them advantages, you would see the unemployment rate for white collar jobs and jobs that are relevant there decline. And it should be less than white Americans. Shouldn't it be? Isn't that math?
yeah. Okay. So we can talk about this particular issue, and then we can circle back to when you say DEI, that's not what DEI advocates are talking about. So maybe you need to adopt better terminology.
No, I'm just telling you what business people do. I tell you what.
Okay, but that's not DEI.
You're talking about businesses. You're talking about businesses and what they're doing. And then you said they set goals because they can't set quotas. You think maybe they were quotas. So you said this is what these companies, and you named the company. So we're in the business realm, not the university realm. We're in the business realm. And if they do the things that you said that they do, not what I said that they should do, but they're actually hiring people who aren't, and they're making hirings not based off of merit, right? Then we should see a reflection of that in the numbers, so that white collar jobs for people of color should decline at a greater rate than, or should even be lower, because it's the law of small numbers, than white Americans, right?
Well, if the companies actually ended up doing what they said they would, you would have more minority representation.
Okay, so what you're saying now is they didn't do it.
Well, okay, so we can get to that. But so some companies walked it back. Some companies did do it. Other companies didn't do it. So a lot has happened.
Which companies did it that you saw the data that confirmed that they did it?
Pardon?
Which companies? You just said some of them did it. Which companies do you believe did it? And you have data that reflects the fact that they did it.
So I read this last night, and I'm pretty sure you tweeted about this at some point too, by the way. And we can pull it up. But an article in Bloomberg, if that's any authority.
Oh no, the one where it says 94% of the incremental hires, right? That one.
Yeah, went to people of color. The year after BLM protests, S&P 100 added more than 300,000. Hold on. Hold on. They added more than 300,000 jobs. 94% went to people of color. Is that not a reflection of?
No, because they used the data incorrectly. So go back and look at the responses to that, Bloomberg, and I think they may even retracted it. Go back and look at the responses to that. It's been multiple years ago. That was what, 4 years ago, 5 years ago?
The article was 2 years ago.
Okay, 2 years, whatever it is. It was several years ago. And so because what it said was the incremental hiring in those companies, when you look at the total numbers, and again, I'm trying to do this from memory, it didn't include retirees, it didn't include people who were fired, it didn't include rollbacks in employment. So there were a lot of people who questioned that that article, and there certainly wasn't anything out there to confirm it. Now, right?
Okay.
So there should be other numbers. My point is, there are numbers that are published by all these companies that you mentioned. A lot of that is the EEOC data, and I don't know if all of them are still publishing because all the PR risk, but like you could even look at Tesla. Tesla was a majority minority company in 21 and 22. I think was the last time that, and even then, when you looked at the numbers, it wasn't staggering over hiring of minorities or Asians or whatever it may be, right? They just have the nature of their workforce is they were majority minority, and that's just the way it is. Other companies are going to be the opposite, but when you look at the numbers, they don't confirm what you're saying.
Okay, so again, this is not the heart of our disagreement here. We're going into a very specific thing here, but according to this Bloomberg article, the share of minority groups
94%. 94%.
Yeah, but they said it increased by two percentage points. The share of executive, managerial, and professional roles held by people of color increased by about 2 percentage points compared with 2020, and that sounds like a small number, but that's more than double the average annual gains at big and mid-sized companies in previous years. But you're saying that data is flawed.
Yeah. So no. Okay. The overall report was flawed, but let's just take it for what that is accurate. The increase in 2%. Do you think you could find 2% more employees if you cast a wider net?
Sure.
There you go.
Okay. So this gets at the heart of the debate here, which is you're saying expanding the talent pool, considering other people, but why specifically then with DEI and with all these companies in 2020 and 2021, they made pledges specifically to increase the amount of minority representation, in some cases specifically their black representation, right? We want to double our black workforce.
Yeah,
we want to increase it to 13%, 20%.
They virtue signal.
Okay. So are you disagreeing that those goals are wrong?
No, it's up to them. I don't care. They get to choose what they get to choose.
No. Your opinion.
Yeah, my opinion is it's up to them. I don't care one way or the other.
Okay, I'm asking you, if you're managing these companies, would you have these pledges? I want 13% of my workforce.
I don't make pledges like that. I just go out and do. I don't need to virtue signal. Like I went to BLM marches because I thought it was the right thing to do. I talked to our predominantly black employee workforce and I listened to their stories and telling me things that I had no idea about that were completely foreign to me that they had to go through. And I was like, okay, I feel like supporting you. I didn't make anybody else do it. I didn't make any, proclamations about we're going to hire more of this. I do think that, I do think there's a lot for companies to learn in terms of their employees who are people of color, but it's up to them. If you want a virtue signal and say, we want 30% more of this, or United, we want in our training school, which by the way, people have to pay for, 50% more people of color, good for you, you go girl, go. But to do that is the question. How you do it is really what I think you should care about, but it's your choice. The question is, how do you do it? Me, if I felt like I had, not done a good job hiring, which I'm not always great at hiring, I cast a wider net because you're going to get more qualified employees.
Okay, so this gets at the heart of the debate. Aside from the outcomes and the practicalities of what's happened at companies and what hasn't, the heart of this debate here, which is I'm very confused why you support this still, and perhaps you can clarify and potentially amend your position. Why are we only talking about race, right? When you talk about expanding the diversity, expanding the pool of talent, okay, that's what you're saying. But DEI, and you also seem to be on board with this. You're saying, well, you don't care what the DEI advocates say, but you seem to agree strongly with the DEI purists and ideologues that expanding the talent pool means specifically looking at racial groups, which in my opinion, is not.
No, you still got to hire the most talented person. It's not, so you can expand racial groups, you can expand whatever, right? When you expand your net, you're always looking for the most talented people.
Okay.
Because I think what you're confused is, gender is 50%, right? Give or take.
Uh-huh.
White people are 70+% of the workforce. They're there.
Yeah.
So what you're suggesting is, let's go find more white people. They're not hard to find everywhere, right? Now, if there was a situation where, hey, we got this company, we just don't have enough white people, and I think that's hurting us, then it would be like, okay, let's go to an all-white university and find more qualified applicants and see if they're qualified to get jobs. Great. If that's the circumstances, I don't care. Companies will make their own decisions on how they do that and what they need.
Okay, but why are you focusing, when you say, again, expanding the talent pool, why are you focusing on racial diversity and not other kinds of diversity?
They're the minorities.
Okay.
They are in the minority. They're not, it's like pick whatever demographic. They are in the minority. The people in the majority are everywhere. I'm white, right? I'm a dude. So I'm in one representation, I'm 70 whatever percent of the workforce. In another representation, I'm 50%. You don't have to look hard to find people who look like me, right? And so that's the underpinning of the logic.
So you're saying, are you implicitly admitting that, and for yourself or for other companies, that by having these racial pledges, they're saying, or maybe you're saying, that you haven't done a good job in trying to find talent from diverse backgrounds?
Depends on the company.
Okay. How about for yourself?
So if I'm a CEO of a company and I say, you know what? I look around and I only see people who look like me, and I want more diversity of opinion and thought. Okay, that's fair, because you may sell to a demographic.
That's not what DEI is, but okay.
Yeah, but I'm saying that's the basis.
I agree with that. Everyone agrees with that, but that's not what DEI is.
Why are you getting such agita about all of this? Because the reality is that's how CEOs make decisions.
Diversity of race is not diversity of opinion. And if you think that, that's actually a very racist opinion to have.
No, okay, so diversity of race doesn't for sure say you're getting diversity of opinion, right? But you may be getting diversity of experience based on what you're looking for, right? Now, if it doesn't potentially, right? But that's part of running a company. Everything's potentially. Okay. Everything potentially can impact your outcomes and your net numbers potentially. And as CEO, your job is to evaluate all the potentialities and make a determination what's best for your company. Now, potentially, you might think you need to virtue signal. You might say, hey, wear MAGA hats all you want. Our company we buy MAGA hats and we put them everywhere on every desk in our company. Okay, if that's what you want to do, great. More power to you. I don't care. MAGA is not a protected. I don't care. Companies make their own decisions. That's part of being a CEO. That's part of being an entrepreneur. That's part of the process.
What you just said there about looking around your office and you want more diversity of opinion or diversity of experience, even, race is not a good proxy for opinion or experience.
Well, it depends on what it is you're looking for. But you still, no matter whatever that opinion is I'm looking for, I'm not going to limit it to a specific race, right?
That's what these companies said.
What's that?
These companies, Starbucks, Microsoft, United Airlines, they didn't say we want people of different persuasions on politics, and spirituality, and science. And they didn't say that. They said we want to double our black workforce. We want more people of a certain skin color. That's what they said. Not what you're saying.
It's up to them to say what they want. This is a free country. They can do it the right way. They can do it the wrong way. It's not me to judge. I can pass my opinion. I don't care what they say. I care what they do. I care that they don't hire illegally, that they don't preference white people or black people or Hispanic or Asian, that they hire the most talented person. But what you're missing in all this, that's not the hard part. I mean, let me rephrase that. What you're missing in all this is that for 99% of positions, finding the most qualified person is very nebulous. It's very subjective. And so that's the hard part in all of this. All the rest is mishigas, right? The hard part is how do you make a determination that one secretary is more qualified than another, that one college graduate that wants to come into a sales training or be an apprentice, for whatever, is more qualified than another. That's hard. That's really, really hard.
Yeah.
That gets you down to a coin flip in a lot of cases. And that's the hard part for companies, right? Where you have an argument is, do companies, when it's a coin flip in terms of qualifications,
Yeah.
do they do what Elon Musk said and said, if it's a toss-up, I'll give it to the person of color, right? That's hard. And companies that, that's probably the hardest decision in dealing with all of this. And you just have to dig deep. We just tried to dig deeper to try to find a point of differentiation for each employee or each candidate before we made them an employee.
So are you denying that over the past few years, and I mean, we can talk anecdotally, you're talking about some kind of data here, which we can get into, but are you denying that in the last few years, especially in the wake of George Floyd and the rise of Black Lives Matter, that if you are a Black individual or other person of color or other marginalized community member, and you're qualified for a particular position, that you are not positively advantaged? Right, because what many CEOs and companies, what many CEOs and what many CEOs and companies have said is that we want Black talent, we want people of minority, quote unquote, underprivileged backgrounds at our companies. Are you doubting that positive advantage has existed for minority people?
You're conflicting yourself. You're saying it's okay to pass a wider net, and so when you recruit more people from more diverse communities, you are going to get more people from different demographics. And that will open the door for finding more qualified people within those demographics. That's what I hear when I hear what you've said.
Okay, I support that. I think everyone supports what you just said.
Yeah, but that's what you said. You might not like the way you said it. You might think it's wrong, but that's effectively what you said. We want more minorities here. How do you get those minorities? What steps do you take? You cast a wider net. And then you look for qualified people, and hopefully, you're going to get more people who are Black or whatever demographic you're looking for, or whatever demographic they happen to be is a better way to say it. And so by casting a wider net, when you say those things, that's how you get to that. You get to that destination. It's really straightforward.
Okay, or you might not, or you might get other kinds of diversity, like diversity of opinion or economic background, school background, family background, religious background.
Whatever.
This is my critique of DEI, and I don't understand why you don't get this.
No, you still hire the most qualified person. You still always hire the most qualified person. Now,
but that's not what DEI is about.
Yes, it is. It always
DEI centers on race and gender as a factor.
No. Now, if you want to get into the academic side, where all the academicians talk about this, and you've got, I don't even know all the people's names, and they build all these businesses around it and doing training. Great.
Ibrahim Kendi, Robin DeAngelo.
Training that companies use that may or may not, you may or may not agree with. Great. But those are different issues. What happens in academia, I've always disagreed with. The fact that the University of Michigan spent $20 million on a DEI department, I think that's insane. I think having these huge departments specifically dedicated to DEI in universities is not the best use of their funds, in my opinion. Right.
All right. I'm aware you think this. Yeah.
It's up to them, right? What activists say, I don't give a fuck, right? Because I'm a business guy trying to do what I think is right in supporting my portfolio companies and supporting the companies I run, right? We can only hire the most qualified people, period, end of story.
Okay. Again, DEI, there's still a lot of distance here in between what you're saying and what I'm saying. Okay, DEI, tell me if you agree or disagree with this. DEI, and this is part of the problem, is when you say DEI, it's very different from what other people mean by DEI, including the people who are the major advocates of this, who are best-selling books on diversity.
Tell me the people who are running the companies, the people who are entrepreneurs starting the companies, because they're the decision makers. All the people who write books, and send me books on business all the time.
Okay.
You say all this shit, right? I don't care.
Okay.
Right?
All right. Fine. Okay. And the only thing I'll say on that is then I think you need different terminology than DEI. When you say I support DEI,
different terminology, Rob.
because you're using their terminology.
Your terminology Because somebody wrote it in a book. That's what you're telling me, right? This person who's an activist wrote it in a book, and that's the definition that they used, and that's the definition they want to convey. I've heard the same thing from other people, but the people in the businesses, what you're telling me is they set goals. Now, you're not telling me that you have data that said, other than one article that says, and even in that article, it's only a 2% increase, but you're not giving me any other
94%
data.
incremental increase, but okay.
Yeah, but the 2% within boards or whatever you said it was, right?
Yeah, executive positions. Yeah, and managerial positions.
So, and
okay.
like I said, that article's been debunked.
Okay, all right. But okay, so you're saying that companies who made racial pledges to increase their minority workforce, that's not wrong, and that you would support that.
They get to say whatever they want. They get to virtue signal just like everybody else does. Everybody, right or left, virtue signals. And how they want a virtue signal is up to them. What I care about is operationally what they do. And if I'm a shareholder, I care about what the results are. That's it.
The problem with what you're saying is that operationally, if expanding your talent pool and casting a wider net, if you're not doing that already, is different from saying we want to double our black workforce. We want 40% minority rep. That is different. That's not what you're saying.
No,
that is different.
I'm saying it's the exact same.
You're saying it's the exact same, really?
Because but the question I keep on asking you, how do
this is the core of the disagreement. Okay, go on.
Yeah. So how do they get there? How do they get there?
Okay, but why have that goal?
So because they're virtue signaling, but how do they get there?
Well, okay, if they're not already casting a wide enough talent, first of all, it's a bad company if they're not doing that.
No, it's hard. It's not so easy to do that. It's not easy unless, even if you're the size of Starbucks, who has locations everywhere, right? It's not so easy to cast that wide net because going through the process of hiring is time consuming and expensive. And it's difficult.
But then why have the goal of we want to double our black workforce? Just have the goal of we want to expand our talent pool and look at people from different backgrounds. Why focus in on race?
Again, Rob, I'll spell it out for you. VIRTUE space SIGNALING.
Okay, you're contradicting yourself. You're saying you agree with them, then you're saying you're.
No, I'm saying you asked me why do they say it? Why not say give an alternative sentence? I'm saying because they're virtue signaling. I'm not conflicting. I keep on saying it over and over and over again.
So you disagree with having a racial goal?
No,
you don't. Yeah,
you can set all the goals you want. You can do whatever you want. If you think it's in the best interest of your company to send a message to your potential, your pool, your total addressable market, your TAM. If you think it's in your best interest to send a message to your total addressable market that you are very supportive of BLM and you're going to set a goal, not a quota, a goal of hiring 30% more within these demographics, have at it. I don't care. Now, you take the risk that people like you are going to get upset and might not do business with you, but that is your choice. Now, what you do is what the EEOC cares about. And you haven't you've seen Stephen, what's his name, Miller's organization, First Legal Fund or whatever they call it, go out and sue a couple people, but we haven't seen the outcome of that. You haven't seen the EEOC, other than asking people to remove stuff. You're not seeing people come out and say, okay, here's 425, here's the Fortune 500, and 475 of them use quotas. You haven't seen any of that. The proof is not in the pudding in this at all. So it's just virtue signaling. Just like my product, like when you see a little thing that says new and improved, the best ever, when it ain't, right? Same
okay, your point about these racial quotas not actually happening is just another argument against DEI just being just bad policy on multiple levels. But putting aside about what's happened, okay, you keep on saying, well, it's companies can do whatever they want, and I agree with you, they can do whatever they want. But we're talking about our opinion. So in your opinion, let's say you have 10 companies, and all 10 companies in the wake of Black Lives Matter, they say we want to double our black workforce. We want 30% BIPOC, whatever that means, representation in our companies. You support that, as you articulated.
I mean,
right?
First of all, you haven't
heard a good goal to have
about any of my companies. Ever.
Pardon?
You haven't. I've owned a lot of companies, run a lot
Okay.
of companies. You've never heard me say that.
Okay. Well,
Right?
I
What
respect
you've
that.
heard me say publicly, I've
Uh-huh.
said it many times, is diversity, equity, inclusion, just like how I defined it for you. We are going to expand our net. We're going to cast a wider net because I think if we do, the numbers say that we will end up with more people of color who happen to be we will end up with more qualified candidates and hires that were the most qualified candidate that happened to fit whatever demographic, right? Because
Right.
you're going to find, it's like the NBA. The NBA didn't always. Who was the first? First, there weren't black players, and then they expanded the net, and there were black players.
Yeah. Now it's
And
70% black.
well, yeah, it's less. I don't know the numbers now, but and
Yeah, that's
then
last I checked.
we went globally, and people we saw at the Olympics. Then all of a sudden it was China. The Mavs had their first Chinese NBA player, Wang Zhixi. And I remember vividly saying, okay, the guy's 7'2" and Dodger can shoot like a motherfucker. I saw him when he came and played in the right when I first bought the Mavs, that we had a little exhibition thing at the West End in Dallas, and I got to see him play. I got to play exhibition stuff with him, and so he could play. So we signed him, and he made a debut. Was it 2001 against the Atlanta Hawks, and it was right after China, the country, confiscated American plane or something, and he got a standing ovation when he went into the game. We expanded the net, and now there are, out of 450 regular roster players, I don't even know how many, but by the way, go down the list: Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Canadian; Nikola Jokic, Serbian, right?
Yeah.
Giannis Antetokounmpo, Greek. You go down the list, and they're all from somewhere else because we spread a wider net. It's the same concept.
Yeah.
If we had not spread a wider net, we could say, boy, we need to just hire more Europeans, but we're not going to put people on the court that can't play, hopefully.
Okay. So I acknowledge, and you've said this clearly, that you did not make any of these racial diversity pledges. Other companies did. And to reiterate for people, because there's so many levels to this, you have said that you support expanding the talent pool, casting a wider net, which I agree with if a company's not doing that already. But you still are supporting companies like Starbucks saying we want 30% BIPOC representation in our corporate positions.
I'm not supporting or not supporting. I'll say it again. I don't care.
But you've been defending it. You've been defending it in this conversation.
What I keep on telling you is that I care about operationally how they do it, right?
Uh-huh.
Just because I'm curious. I want to see
Yeah.
other practices. I want to see the results. And to determine whether or not the results, that's why I went back and looked at the EEOC numbers in the past. I haven't recently,
Yeah.
but in the past I have. Because I wanted to see how the proclamations compared to the reality. And the reality never matched the proclamations. So I don't care what they say because it doesn't translate into reality.
Okay. Well, so then are we agreeing more than we think we are? Because so are you saying that having race-based goals for we want to double our black workforce, we want 30% BIPOC representation. Are you saying you disagree with having those goals?
No, I say I don't care. It's virtue signaling. I keep on telling you that. I keep on repeating it over and over again.
But you're also not acknowledging the fallacy and lunacy of having race-based goals, because you don't need to have that. If what you want is people of different backgrounds and you want to give more equal opportunity, you don't need to say we want to double our black workforce. All you need to say is we're going to cast a wider talent. We want everyone to apply. We want people of different backgrounds to apply. And by the way, that should be happening already. And companies that aren't doing that, like, they should be held accountable for that if that's happening. But you don't need a race-based goal. And what I don't understand from what you're saying is why have the race-based goal at all? Why are we focused on race? Why not have a political-based goal, like based on experiences or based on, like, if you want people who've been through hard times, right? If you want people that show more resilience, that are more open or more creative, you can target those things. But you don't seem to be. Yeah. So
let me ask you a question.
I think you would agree on that, but I don't understand why you don't see the lunacy of zooming in on race as being the target for increasing your diversity, as opposed to religion or your political orientation or your ideas and who you are as a human being? Why can't we focus on the totality of the human being and just say we want people from all backgrounds rather than we strictly want double the black workforce or 30%
So wait, did you
minority
just
people?
say it was okay to do it based off of religion?
I'm saying broadly speaking, the
Okay,
totality of
so
factors.
let me ask you a question. Define virtue signaling.
We agree there. We don't have to talk about that.
Okay, what I keep on saying, and you just don't want to accept it for whatever reason, that the reason these companies are using the word goals and in reference to different demographics is because they are virtue signaling. They made the determination that by saying these things, they convey a certain virtue that they think will be better for their companies. That to me is corporate virtue signaling. That is what they do,
Okay.
what they want to do. If that is their choice, they also realize that there are risks associated with that, and whether they've seen the backlash for people who don't want to do business with somebody who supports Nike supporting Colin Kaepernick. When they
Yeah.
came out, and they started working with Colin Kaepernick and they talked about it, that was their choice. And they had a lot of people
Okay.
say, I got, the Clay Travises of the world, talking about NBA ratings. We'll never watch the NBA because, they took a knee and da-da-da-da-da-da-da, right? People make their own determinations. We all virtue signal in our own way.
Yeah.
And so,
Okay, fine. Let's put aside that problem then. Let's put aside
but
virtue
that's the whole
signaling.
response to you asking me about these companies and their 30%
Okay.
goals.
Okay, fine. Let's put aside what the companies say in public and their virtue signaling and catering to progressive audiences and groups, etc. Do you think it makes sense? Let's say the company's not virtue signaling. Internally, the company has a goal. We want to double our black workforce or have more minority representation. Do you think that makes sense? And I know I think the answer is yes. You do think that makes sense.
It
What?
depends on the circumstances. Again, I think that's primarily virtue signaling because you don't see it in the numbers, in the EEOC numbers. So I don't
Okay.
think they turn around and look inside their company and say, make sure this happens. Maybe some do, but I also think that you also have to look at historical disproportions. Let me ask you a question. Do you think in the past there have been white people in HR who discriminated against black people?
Yes.
Do you think that still occurs today?
In theory, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
You don't think in practice?
Well, it's totally possible that
Okay,
happens.
fair enough.
Just
You don't
like the
have
other way
data,
around.
right? What's missing is data,
Yeah.
right? We don't have data one way or the other. And that's fair, and that's a fair response, right? But if a company has found itself with somebody who ran HR who discriminated against minorities and felt like we made a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
And we're still only going to hire the most qualified people, but we are going to go out of our way to recruit and do our best to hire more people of color because we historically discriminated. Is that good or bad?
The devil's in the details. As a sentiment, I agree with that. That's a noble sentiment. But as practice, if you're hiring just trying to find the best people based on merit, you're automatically going to have people of color and disadvantaged backgrounds who you end up capturing as a result of that. You don't need to have a racial goal. You don't need to have.
With me now.
You don't need a percentage though. You don't need 30% minority.
Okay, so that's the virtue signaling. But you agree with me that this is what companies should be doing. This is what the best companies do. Exactly what I've suggested, and that is put aside the activists, but because of what the numbers show, DEI in practice for corporations is just what I've said. Expand the pool and find the qualified people. And there are going to be certain circumstances where companies realize that they did discriminate against people of color. And, maybe the government came after them and said, okay, we're going to take action against you, but maybe not. And maybe they need to, work harder to expand that pool of applicants. And in that particular case, it may be the right thing to say, you don't want to say we historically discriminated, but if you recognize that you did, maybe it's the right thing to say to everybody, hey, we're going to increase our our goal is to increase the minority workforce by 30%. You don't
Okay.
know.
Okay. Okay, well, this gets to another point, which is why, again, with that specific goal, you're not always going to have proportional talent in every different area.
Okay.
Okay, the NBA, last I checked, is 70% black. You don't have equal representation of Asians and whites
I never
and
said
people
to
of
me that. You've only heard me say you hire the most qualified people, period, end of story. You keep on saying there's external activists and people who write books that say it's something different.
and companies that say it, and you're saying they're virtue signaling. Okay, fine, all right. That's another argument against DEI is that you're virtue signaling and not actually doing the thing that you said you
But
would.
then, welcome to America.
Either
You
way,
don't
that's a
think
bad
people on the
outcome.
right virtue signal as well? There are companies
Right.
dedicated to, only patriotist, right leaning products, right? That only sell MAGA hats, that, it goes both ways. It's not unique to any one position or party or ideology.
Right. So we're agreeing that this is virtue signaling when companies do this.
Right?
We're agreeing that you should expand that if you're not already casting a wide net, that you should cast a wide net. You should
Great.
be as inclusive as possible. We're agreeing on that. Where I think you're still what you're still not understanding is that, okay, let me phrase it this way. Do you think it's inherently a problem if at your bank, your accounting firm, your law firm, you have 5% of your workforce is black instead of 13 or 14%? Do you think that's
No,
inherently a problem?
no,
No. Okay. You don't think that that's necessarily the result of racism?
no.
Do you think that companies should be making efforts to double their black
Not
workforce?
necessarily, no.
Then you're conceding all these points of what DEI is. DEI is
No,
we want equal
no,
representation. Companies
no.
say they
There's
want
a
equal
thousand
representation.
reasons. You might be in a town that only has 3% black people. It's hard to hire a higher percentage of black people. You might be in a town where the educational level is X and you need Y. There's a million reasons why those things will play out the way they do that have nothing to do with DEI. And trying to make it a DEI issue is ridiculous.
Okay, and this is an adjacent issue, but you brought this up, and I've just looked it up. There are several companies that did increase their minority workforce. Nike, J.P. Morgan, and Chase, they hired over 3,800 black students since 2020. Nike, as of 2024, is 41% of U.S. corporate workforce is racial/ethnic minorities. They're on track for its goal of 30% of Black and Latinx representation by 2025. I disagree with having that goal.
So wait,
Do
so
you,
JP Morgan, the best bank in America, the largest best bank in America, right?
yeah,
Maybe they just cast a wider net, right?
yeah. So
Their
if that's
stock
what they're
has
doing, then
struggled.
great.
Their stock has struggled, right? But they're still the biggest and best shoe company. We'll put aside best in economic terms, they're still the biggest. So maybe they're doing it right.
That's possible if that's what's happening, or if what you're doing is we want more black people, let's get more black people, which
Okay, so
means
let me ask you a question. At some point, because this has been going on for 5 years now, right? We're starting in 2020 is when you said it started, right? And maybe longer, depending on who you listen to, right? So for 5 years, they've been doing this. At what point do you think not hiring the best person impacts their financial statements?
yeah, I agree. That would make an impact.
Name the situations where you've seen that happen.
I haven't done a rigorous study of every Fortune 500 company,
Just the ones
unfortunately.
you list, just the ones you talk about. They're pretty
Okay.
straightforward, right? That's my whole point.
I don't think it's going to make a ginormous difference to hire slightly less qualified, and this is the concern about DEI, slightly less qualified minority individuals over their white counterparts because of optics. I don't think that's going to result in
Of course, it's going to
a one-to-one
change things.
lower
Of
net
course it's
profit
going to
per
change
year.
things. If that's actually the case, right? Because just because someone says they weren't hired for DEI reasons or promoted for DEI reasons doesn't make it true. But let's go forward. Here we are in 2025. And now there's a huge microscope on all DEI, anything. I don't think that's a bad thing. I don't necessarily have a problem with what Trump did. And I don't like what he did in the military where everything was a search and replace. I think that's kind of ridiculous. But in terms of, one of the promises he made was to get rid of DEI. I think, the way I've defined it, it's a cultural situation within organizations. So it doesn't have to be a formal program, and you don't have to have, a big department, if any department at all. It's just adhering to, hiring the best people, putting your people in positions to succeed, and treating your people well and respecting them. And if culturally that's happening within an organization, nothing will really change regardless of what happens from the administration. But if you're right and all these people were wrong in how they do it, all the numbers will decline, won't they, for people of color? And because none of those programs that were in place, so we should see a bunch more promotions of white people, right? Because all those inhibitors are gone. We should see a lot more hiring of white people, right? Because all those inhibitors are gone. We should see higher unemployment relative to where the indexing is. We should see unemployment for people of color index higher. Now, who knows, because of the deportation where that impacts it, but we should see these numbers play themselves out. So we will know over the next couple of years if you were right or wrong.
Okay.
Right?
A couple of examples.
Wait, I want to get a commitment from you, Rob, because our conversations last years. Maybe it'll turn into decades, right? So do you agree that because of the changes introduced by the Trump administration, that they should play out in the numbers, and that we should see more promotions of white people than we did before, and we should see less employment or unemployment over-indexing relative to white people, because all those advantages that were supposedly in place by DEI are now being removed, and you can't virtue signal them anymore because that works against you. You can virtue signal the other way, but so we should see this net impact on the numbers. Do you agree with that?
This is too complicated of a multifactorial equation. If companies are directly responding to what the administration is doing, then sure.
They have no choice. You've got Caroline Lucas, the one who called me out on Twitter, right? And said she's in charge of the EEOC.
Yeah.
There's nothing that's going to make her happier. I guess she's interim, but there's nothing that's going to make her happier than to find somebody who's using quotas or doing it the wrong way when it comes to trying to reach their goals. That would give everybody in the anti-DEI world the best heart on they've ever had, right?
Right.
And so these things should play out in the numbers. Don't you agree?
Right. Yeah. They could, except if companies find a way around it. If they're just having these nebulous goals.
Then you're saying that there was no point in even trying to do anything about DEI because companies will just work around it?
I don't know. I'm not a CEO, so I don't know what companies are going to do. But I'm saying it's possible they could have a workaround. It's possible.
What's the guy's name? Robbie Starbucks or whatever?
Pardon?
Robbie Starbucks, is that the guy's name?
What guy's name?
Isn't there a guy, Robbie Starbucks, that is like, anti-DEI at every level?
I think I've heard that name on Twitter somewhere. I don't know. I don't know that guy.
Yeah, maybe I'm mispronouncing his name. But the point being that there are, Christopher Rufo, right? There are people who their whole mission in life is to catch people doing these things and to make an issue of them and reverse them, which is fine. They're welcome to do that. I don't care, right? That's what makes a market. That's checks and balances. That's what makes this country great, is that they can do it.
Okay.
But if they're correct, we should see an impact on employment numbers. You have to agree with that, because otherwise there's no point in having this hour-long conversation.
It's possible unless companies find a workaround, which I don't know. I'm not a business executive, so I don't know how companies run.
Well, I've been telling you how it works for business executives.
You know that better than I do. But just to make this very clear for people, what you said earlier is worth highlighting. There's a big distance between the BLM DEI advocates like Ibram X. Kendi, who says things like,
I don't know who that is. Oh no, I've heard his name. I don't really know.
He's maybe him and Robin DiAngelo, two of the most popular anti-racist, BLM supporting, DEI supporting authors of this age. Ibram X. Kendi has said, and he's gotten millions of dollars of donations in the wake of BLM and George Floyd. He has said, every time I see a racial equality, I assume there's an inequity. I assume there's injustice or unfairness. And you disagreed with that, and I agree with you on that. Disparities do not always equate to discrimination.
I don't know what he says. I don't know anybody who knows who he is, right, or gives a chord to what he says. So maybe they know. We don't discuss it. Let's put it that way. I've
Yeah,
never
those
had
are
a
very
problem with
popular
it.
names. Robin
Yeah.
DiAngelo and Ibram X. Kendi are incredibly popular
Yeah, I've
names,
heard
and the
of
DEI,
the Ibram, whatever his name is. The other guy
Ibram
I've
X.
never heard.
Kendi.
Yeah, I've never heard of. So it doesn't influence me one way or the other.
Yeah, so that's
I
part
don't
of the
think they
problem.
have any influence. But
Yeah,
the bigger point is, just like on the right, you have people that are hardcore MAGA, and no matter what Donald Trump says, it is right. And you have people on the left who are pro-DEI, and everything that is geared towards making white people seem, vindictive towards black people, they are going to say. That's how marketing works.
yeah,
That's how businesses are built. That's what happens. And fortunately for people on the right, more people spend money on subscriptions to podcasts and subscriptions
yeah.
elsewhere than they do on the left. But just because a guy makes a business out of it doesn't mean he's influential.
Part of the problem here is that when you say DEI, it's very different from what the DEI advocates say. We're agreeing that not all racial disparities equal discrimination, but the DEI advocates and the people who've originated these theories, critical race theory, intersectionality, DEI, anti-racism, Black Lives Matter, like all these things, the greatest, most influential people in those fields, in academia, in popular discourse, and on social media, they have a very different view than you do.
Great. So
Okay,
what?
so
What I talk to you from, so you're using as your variables of importance, you're referencing corporations, everything in hiring. I
yeah.
guarantee you that the CEOs and the entrepreneurs who start and run these companies aren't, I shouldn't say never, rarely are giving any consideration to what those people think they are due.
Except for the optics of not having enough black people at your law firm, not having enough women representation at Google,
But
et cetera, et
that's
cetera.
a corporate decision, and like we said and agreed on, it's virtue signaling.
For example, in 2017, James Damore, he circulated the Google memo, giving some potential evolutionary, psychological, and biological reasons for why there might be a disparity in gender at Google, why there might not be enough female engineers, differences in occupation choice by women, right? Women tend to select computer science and engineering less in college than men do. He was fired for doing that Google memo,
Okay.
right? So that's just one example of someone who's articulating these heterodox opinions, who is pointing out that not all racial or gender disparities in this case are attributable to discrimination, and that's the consequence that you face. And that's
But
that's
you don't
another
know
issue.
why was he fired? Was he fired because of what he said, or did he violate a company policy?
It was very obvious that it was because of what he said.
Okay.
If he had not said that, but
I'll just tell you from my experiences, what may appear as obvious on the outside rarely is.
I'm proposing to you to not use the term DEI, because DEI is not
No,
your
I'm going
term.
to use it all day, every
DEI was not
day,
invented in the
Rob.
business realm, though. DEI was invented by far left, identitarian, sometimes socialist, Marxist activists. That's their term. So
I don't care.
By
It
the way,
conveys.
they would probably call you racist for co-opting their term and
I
not saying.
co-opted industries. I'm changing healthcare with costplusdrugs.com. I started the streaming industry. I did the first all high def TV network. Every time someone says, "Oh, don't do that," fuck that, right? I'm just telling you, I'll co-op shit. I don't care. I'm telling you, and we're having a great conversation on this. Just because someone else used it, who started the Democratic Party, who switched, the Southern, there's all this nomenclature that evolves over time. The term woke is evolved. Just everything evolves over time. So don't use it because this person started. I don't care.
You need better terms, or
I don't need better terms.
or properly redefine. Okay.
You can either decide to, look at it from my perspective, and I think you have, and I appreciate that, and disagree that I use this term, but there's nothing you can say that can tell me to change it. It's not going to happen.
Okay. Well, as you know, people mean different things by DEI, and the DEI advocates, right, the most popular ones, they don't mean what you mean by it. And so that's worth noting on your part. And maybe you should do a better job when you're saying I support DEI. You should be like, hey, I'm not supporting closing racial disparities just for the sake of closing them, which is what the advocates are saying.
Rob, I've been very clear what I mean by it. I say it early. I say it often. I say it late. I
Okay.
say it during the day. I'm very consistent in what I've said. I say it online. I say it in speeches I give. I sit in groups that where, you know, people who are very supportive, probably of the people that you've mentioned, and I stick to the same definition. And you are the only person ever who has told me not to use the term. And that's fine. You can, and I respect your, you know, your willingness to ask, but it's not going to happen.
Okay, fine. The remaining disagreement we have on this, and I'm glad we're filtering through all this noise, the virtue signaling, what companies are actually doing, right? We were establishing DEI, the goals the companies are setting, they're not actually being met in some cases. In other cases, they are being met. And so, and I
But
sense
you
there
got to
is,
show me data other than one article. You got to show me
okay,
company specific data.
okay. Apple, they increased the number of black employees in leadership by nearly 60% from 2020 to 2024.
Okay.
Microsoft increased their black and African American representation among employees by 1.5%. Okay, that's pretty small. Google, they saw a 27% increase in black plus, whatever that means, leadership representation from 2020 to 2023. So that leaves us with two possibilities on that front. And I think the answer is pretty obvious. Either Google, Microsoft, and these other companies before were for some reason perpetuating racism and not properly casting a wide net and giving black Americans equal opportunity, or what's more likely is what's happening is that they're deliberately looking for black talent, even if it might mean that they're a bit less or maybe more substantially less qualified than white talent. I
Well,
disagree
you're
with
saying
that.
by definition, if you hire more black people, they must
No,
be less qualified.
I give you two scenarios. I said
No, but one
either,
of those is that's exactly what you said. You said you gave examples of these numbers going up, and you
yeah,
specifically said that by definition, it means that they must have hired people less qualified,
that's not what I said.
suggesting, yes, you did.
I said those are two scenarios. I said, or the scenario is that those companies were racist in their hiring and talent pool
That was the
before.
first option, right?
That was, yeah. So either
And
either
go
for
to the second option. What was your second option?
or the second option is that you're hiring more black people just for the sake of having more black people.
And so that's only an issue. So if you're hiring more black people, are they more qualified? No, let me rephrase that. The black people you hired, is it possible in your mind that they just cast a wider net and
Yeah,
they found more qualified black people?
that I already said in the first
Okay,
option. That's
so why are you
possible.
presuming by when you give these numbers, why are you presuming that that's not the case? Because you just said in your
Because the percentage is so ginormous. 60% more black employees,
Oh,
30%.
so it's impossible to find because there's also maybe they started from a small base. Maybe there were only 100 black employees in those positions, and they increased it to 161. But you don't seem to think it's feasible that they just are more qualified, and that's why Microsoft hired them.
Sure, but then that means that Microsoft's original policy for hiring people was incredibly racist, or that they were not inclusive to other racial groups, which means, wow, that's a lot of
Maybe,
racism if that's true.
well, maybe they just didn't do a good job and they improved. Is that possible?
Yeah, but
Okay.
60%
Why did you
sixty
not give
percent
that?
increase in black applicants?
Yeah, but from what number to what number?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't know. We can find the granular details, but those are big
But you don't
jumps.
think that matters? Look, either you believe that you can find more qualified black people by casting a wider net, or you don't. And just because the number is 61% doesn't mean that either A, they were inefficient at what they were doing before, even though it's possible, or B, doesn't mean they were less qualified because it's a big percentage. Not at all.
I'm saying it's very likely that you are honing in on race as a sole variable. You want more black people in the wake of BLM and George Floyd. You don't want activists to get mad at you. You have potentially woke employees who are saying, "Oh, there's too many white guys here. Let's have more gay people, trans people, black people." And to address that pushback, you're now selecting for these specific racial and gender groups to have at your company.
So they're selecting for these racial and gender groups to have in their company.
Yeah.
What's the rest of it?
I mean, that's it. There's this obsessive focus on race and gender and sexual orientation. And so then
What's
that's
your
what they're using.
presumptions? You realize the underlying presumption there, right? is that it's not possible that they were qualified because you think it's a big percentage. So because it's a big percentage, it's not possible that they just happened to interview more and find more qualified candidates, and they hired some of them because they were more qualified.
I'm sure some of them are more qualified.
Oh,
But
some of them are more qualified because it's impossible to find a big number of black people who are more qualified, right?
unless your company was executing a racist policy and you were not
No, or you just
properly
didn't
giving
do a
black
good
people
job.
fair
It didn't
shake.
necessarily have to be intentional. It didn't have to be intentional. Maybe they just started paying attention to it. Maybe because of all the things that happened with BLM, they started paying attention to their hiring policies and realized they were not doing a good job. Is that possible?
It's possible, but then
Okay, why wasn't that option number 3? Why wasn't them casting a wider net option number 4, Rob?
Because if you're casting a wider net, why are we specifically focusing on black Americans and transgender Americans,
Rob,
gay Americans,
you're
minority people?
focusing on them. You are focusing on them.
No, the companies are focusing on them.
They're
Companies are.
reporting, right? You are focusing on what they reported because the only reason you know these numbers is why.
They reported it.
Right.
And it's in line with their stated goals.
Focusing on that because if you look at the EEOC numbers, what are the demographic categories that they have to report?
Gender, race, ethnicity.
So they reported what they had to report by law. And you're saying, and so you're trying to make it out like because they reported it, they must be living up to this approach of only hiring because of demographic. And what I'm telling you, no, they're just doing what they need to do by law. And you're looking at it, looking for things to support your point that you're trying to make that they must have put race and gender, etc., over qualifications. There's no
I think they put
evidence in any of that.
disproportionate emphasis on immutable characteristics. That's what I'm saying.
Well, that's what you're saying, but you have no evidence whatsoever. You're guessing that.
It's okay. Let's see if we can resolve this disagreement.
Yes or no? Are you guessing that?
Well, it's based on ginormous jumps in these numbers, and the fact that these statistics have changed.
The EEOC, Rob, just for your own edification, right? I don't have it here. The EEOC numbers include actual numbers if they're published. Okay. And you can go back, and at the bottom of them, it gives a total. And then underneath, usually it says the previous years. So you can see the jump, which is what you've been able to identify.
Yeah, 60%, 30% jumps.
Right, but you could look at the actual numbers, and you get to see what the reference points are. Is it a huge number? They had, out of 100,000 employees, now they have many more, 97,000 were black, and they increased it 61%. Okay, you look and you can see the actual numbers. Or was it 100,000 employees and 4,000 of them were black, and they increased it to 4,240. Hired 240 more.
Yeah. I got that point. Let me say it this way, and then hopefully we can move on to the next topic after this. Let's see if we can resolve this disagreement here. Okay, if I'm the owner of a company and I want to have people of different backgrounds, diverse experiences, and to clarify, I said earlier, I mentioned all kinds of things: personality, life experience, family background, religious background, political opinions. I think that the totality of the person should be potentially considered in a lot of places. Of what has this person endured? What kind of experiences have they had? Has this person been, given a trust fund when they were kids and just had everything handed to them on a platter, or did this person overcome a lot of hardship and worked multiple jobs? Okay, if I'm the CEO of a company, and tell me if you disagree with this, and I'll grant you that companies can do what they want, okay, as long as they're not violating civil rights law. But if I'm the CEO of a company or CEO of 10 companies, I would be selecting based on merit. We want people of diverse experiences, people who come from different backgrounds, but not hone in on race and gender and sexual orientation. We just want the best people. And we want people who've overcome challenges, who've overcome hardships. But the problem of what these other companies, what they've said is, we want to double our black workforce. We want to increase minority representation. And what happens is, by doing that, you are potentially favoring privileged black guy, privileged brown guy who, his parents went to Ivy League universities. He went to Harvard, had all these things handed to them, didn't have to work multiple jobs in college. Okay, you preferentially favor that guy over the poor white guy who grew up in inner city Baltimore, who had a single mom, had to work 2 different jobs in high school, but because he's white, he is actively not the black applicant is preferenced over the white applicant simply because of race. And so what I'm advocating for is looking at merit and the person's skills, life experiences, and not focusing on race. And so that's the problem of DEI. I mean, do you disagree with my approach of not factoring in race at all and just factoring the person's skill sets and what they've been through in life, let's say?
Look, I've done blind applications, so that'll tell you where I stand, right? But when you look, you're never going to have 2 people that are exactly the same. And so it's never going to be a balance in their resumes. There's always going to be something different. So why do you give preference to somebody who grew up like me versus someone who's growing up like my kids? Because both of us, let's just say we graduated college at the same time. We're in a movie, it's switch, right? And we come back and we're graduating at the same time. How do you make that determination? If you're the person in charge of hiring, how do you determine one candidate versus another?
Okay, we do an interview and let's say, okay, well, what was your high school experience
like?
Let's just say
you love them both. They were different, but you love them both.
Okay, if they both have roughly equal education and SAT scores, GPAs, whatever, and the one guy, he had a single mom and he had to work 3 jobs in high school and college, and the other guy, his dad was a hedge fund manager, I might be more interested in the guy who had to work his fucking ass off to get to where he is right now, as opposed to the other guy.
There's nothing that stops you from doing that. That's, everybody's going to make hiring people who are doing the HR is going to make the determination based off of what they think is best. Now,
but that's not what companies said in 2020. That's not what companies said in 2020. They said we want to double our black workforce. That's different from what I said.
But when they get to the wider net, they have to make decisions on the people they actually interview. If you're hiring for one position where you want that commitment and determination, okay, you make one choice. If you're hiring for a job where it's for a hedge fund and you want the person to raise money, right? It's a tougher call because you might have to balance this person's, connections versus this person's lack of connections, but willingness to work harder. Jobs are hard to hire for. Hiring is hard, Rob.
So why have racial goals?
Really hard. Why have what?
Why have racial and gender goals, and why not? Why?
Because I can't say it enough times, Rob. Companies virtue signal.
Okay. So we're agreeing on that, but you're still not calling out this idea, this principle that these goals that various companies have set for increasing racial representation at their companies. Whereas I would say just increase it, just cast a wider net and see who you get. And you might get 5%. You might cast a really wide net. You might get 5% qualified black applicants.
What you're really telling me is you don't like the way the companies communicated their goals. And
I think their goals are wrong. I don't agree with race-based goals.
Okay, so that's fine. When you run the company, you choose. When you now as an opinion, and as an influencer, you get to say what you want. That's the way this country works, and that's what makes it beautiful.
No, we're not debating that. Yeah, everyone has the right to say what they want.
You're not coming to any conclusions. You're not changing my mind or anything because there's nothing really substantial on what you're saying. What the foundation of what you're saying is because these external people who I don't know that are activists that I don't read, who post everywhere and influence people that I don't know, that
we already made that caveat. We're just talking about companies and their racial goals, and you seem to keep on defending their race-based goals.
I don't care. They have their reasons. If I'm concerned about a company not hiring based off of merit, I'll look at the numbers. I'll look at the company. But no matter what, it'll play out in the numbers at some point. And now, Rob, we get to actually see the counter argument. And that's going to make this interesting. Awesome. So we can have this conversation in 2 years or whatever and say, okay, what's happened now that we removed DEI as a construct where DEI is not a positive, from the administration and could put you under assault or whatever, you could find yourself on the wrong end of a lawsuit. So we'll find out, because if what you say is true and there are certain demographics that were being advantaged as a way to hit goals, not quotas, but goals, then Those will reverse at some point, and we'll see that, right?
Okay. Last question on this. Why are you not willing to condemn companies who have these race-based goals? Why do you say they're virtue signaling, but also I understand what they're doing?
Yeah,
I don't.
I don't look. If I thought it was that bad, I'd start a company to compete with them.
Okay. Okay. But at your companies, you don't do race-based goals or gender-based goals.
No.
Okay. So you are actively going against what DEI ideology stands for, and that's okay.
So
Okay. All right. Then
we
we're
implement
agreeing.
DEI the way I understand it and the way I believe it and what I know to be its definition. Just because you don't like my definition doesn't make me wrong.
Last thing I'll say on this, a quote from your Lex Friedman interview. I already said last thing. Okay, last thing.
It's your show, Rob. I'm just here.
On Lex Friedman, you said something to the effect of, if I have 30 white guys at my company and I'm looking around and I want more diverse perspectives, why is it wrong to look towards more black applicants? And my question to you is, why do you conflate diversity of experience, diversity of personality, diversity of human being with race? Because you can have black people and white people with very similar ideologies and beliefs.
Sure.
Race is not a good proxy for
But it's my
judging.
company, and I'm looking at the 30 people, right? And
Okay.
so I know who they are. It's only 30, not 300, not 3,000, not 30,000. It's
Okay.
300. And so I'm able to determine, because I know them, that there's a lack of diversity of opinion.
But diversity of race is not diversity of opinion. Why do you think those two
necessarily?
things are the
No,
same?
it doesn't have to be just because of race, but there's a good chance that you can open up new ideas and new ideas if you cast a wider net, right? And just interview people that are different. Now, if I can't find a more qualified one, which most likely means I'm not interviewing enough or in the right places, that's on me. And it may be also a reflection in that example. I don't remember what the context was, but it may also be that I didn't do a good enough job of casting a wide net. It may well be that I just went to one school or two schools or five schools, or maybe because it's a small company, I only hired based off a reference. And if I only hired, start with two people in my small company, they said, hey, and I've done this. I'm like, hey, who do you know that can work for the company? Okay, do you trust them? Yeah, we'll train them. Great. Then another one, and the next thing you know, they all look like me because I hired them via my friends. And you look around and you go, we all know each other, right? We need to get some other viewpoints in all this because we go to the same bars, we watch the same teams, we hang out, we went to the same 3 or 4 schools, and you want to expand, the hiring net.
Yeah,
So
but that's nothing to do with race.
exclusive.
That transcends race, though. That transcends.
Yeah, but it just so happens, right? The way life works, the way business works, when you're growing a company, you take the path of least resistance. And some days when you look up and you realize that the path of least resistance wasn't the best path and that you're missing opportunities because I didn't expand a wide enough net, and maybe I don't even have the most qualified people. Because when you're a small company, you rarely just hire the most qualified person. I didn't always hire the most qualified person because when it's me and 500 people and I'm just trying to keep the doors open and I'm just trying to make sure I get my payroll paid, I ain't going to 5 universities to make sure there's the diversity. I'm saying to my friends, who do you know?
Right. But this has nothing to do with race, though. We're agreeing. But this is not racial. So,
right. But all I'm saying is if I look around and I see people who look like me, there's a chance I did it wrong.
Okay, but you could be in your own downtown Manhattan Ivy League bubble, and you could have 2 black guys and 2 gay guys, and have 10 white guys, and have a couple of trans people or whatever. And that to me is not diversity. That, like, people who went to the same school, people with the same.
Yeah, but why do you assume that it's about diversity and not about qualifications?
I'm saying that racial or gender diversity does not mean you're going to get true diversity of life experience or opinion.
That's true. But again, at the end of the day, it comes down to hiring the most qualified people.
Yeah.
If the way you hired, like most small businesses, is by referral, you're not necessarily hiring the most qualified people. And you probably haven't cast a wide enough net, which is not unusual because it's expensive, hard, and time consuming for smaller businesses to do that. And so some days you look up and you realize, oh shit, right? It's not just race-based, but I probably didn't hire the right way.
Yeah.
By the way, I rarely do hiring anymore because I'm not good at interviewing because I always try to sell myself in that person, whether they're white, orange, green, or yellow, right? I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, I can make you work. That's not good for hiring.
The big daylight between what you're saying and what other companies have set out as their goals is that you support expanding the net for finding talent, and that may mean you might get more black employees, more black applicants, or you might get more Indians, you might get more gay people, you might
Great,
get more Hindus, you might get more Chinese, but not
great.
necessarily. You might get more white guys, you might get
Okay.
more people of
And
a certain. But
and that's okay because the numbers
that's
say
not what these companies are saying.
there's a better chance you're going to get more white guys just because of the numbers, right? That's just the way it works. But at the same time, if you cast a wide enough net, there's a ton of people of color who are really, really, really qualified to do just about
Sure.
any job. And so
Yes.
you're going to run into them too, and that's a good thing. That's all.
So yeah, so casting a wider net and then getting whatever you find, whether that's more diverse or maybe that's less diverse. You're saying even if you get a less diverse
The
population,
goal is to win. The goal as a company is to win, right? To succeed and be profitable and let everybody, including your employees, make a fuck ton of money. That's
yeah.
the goal.
So you're fine if you're casting a wider net in your talent pool. You're going to more schools and you get 20% less racial diversity as a result of that.
Yes.
You're perfectly fine with that.
Yeah, now it means now I'm going to take a look at it again and say, okay, where are we hiring? Because obviously we're missing qualified candidates because I think there's a lot of Black, Hispanic, et cetera, qualified candidates. You know, we're going to analyze our approach, but I'm not mad because we didn't find more in that first outreach. I just want the most qualified candidates, period,
Yeah.
in the story.
And that's another sort of partial. I mean, we'll see if this is a disagreement. That people on the left, they assume that when you see a racial disparity in, say, computer science, I wrote some articles on this a few years back. It's turned out in computer science and finance as two examples, there was far less black students, like compared to their proportion in the population. There was far less percentage that were taking computer science and finance as an example. And so if you have 5% of the student body in the finance class at a university that's black, then you might not be able to get 13 to 14% black employees.
Yeah, that's just the way it goes. Like I said before, if you live in a town where there aren't a lot of black people, aren't a lot of Hispanic people, you're not going to have, 13%
Yeah.
of your
So you're fine with
workforce.
that?
Yes. Why would I not be fine with it?
Okay, great. But that's not what Starbucks and Amazon and Meta and
I
Pfizer.
don't care. They can virtue signal all they want. Why are you trying to get me to pass judgment on them when, I told you what I think, that they're virtue signaling?
Yeah, but they're not only virtue signaling, though. Those goals are based on false premises that you need to fill exact racial.
You're contradicting yourself.
Statistical
the whole point
numbers.
of virtue signaling is just to make it seem like you're doing those things, or to let people know so that they want to do business with you.
Except for Apple and Microsoft, who actually made progress on their racial goal that they set out.
But you're presuming that those people aren't qualified.
Okay, Apple sets out a goal. We want more black people. They get more black people. It's pretty obvious what's going on there.
See, I can make a lot of comments right now, Rob, and I won't. Right? You're presuming that because they increase the number of people of color, those people must not be qualified, and nothing could be further from the truth.
It's because why weren't you hiring those people of color in the first place?
Because it's hard. Go on,
Rob.
What's the most number of people that have ever worked for you, Rob?
Yeah, less than 0.001% of what you have. So that,
no.
I'm not going to win that experience.
Number of people that you've ever hired that have ever worked for you?
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, probably less than 15 on the podcast. Yeah.
Is it easy to hire those people and pick those right people?
Is it easy? Finding the right people that I want can be challenging.
Yeah. Have you ever had to fire somebody?
Yeah.
It's hard, isn't it? It's really hard to fire somebody. It's painful to fire somebody because it's an admission that you made a mistake. It's an admission that you didn't put them in a position to succeed, or whatever the reasons are. Right?
But it wasn't because of race. It wasn't because I wasn't hiring.
The point is, hiring is hard.
Yeah.
It is hard to do for big companies and for little companies, particularly for little companies. But big companies have just as many challenges because they have so many levels of bureaucracy. Anyways, look, hiring is hard.
Yeah, then do a better job of hiring. Stop fixating on race and gender as your goals.
You know
to
what,
me,
Rob? If you were better at all that than they are, you'd have 500 employees, right? You've got a business. Why isn't your business bigger?
well, I'm a podcaster. I'm like a.
All right. So there's
it's a
podcasters that make tens of millions of dollars that
yeah.
have 20,
I'm
30.
relatively new to the game here, and I'm an
All right.
independent writer first and foremost. But okay,
No, that's good. I'm not trying to diminish, right? I'm a fan of every entrepreneur. I respect
Okay.
everything you're doing. I'm not trying to diminish it all. All
Okay.
I'm saying is it's hard. It's
Yeah.
hard to run a business.
I agree.
To grow that business is hard. It's
I
harder
agree.
for someone like you trying to build a following and grow people that want to come back and listen, that are willing
Yeah.
to commit their time to you, to hear what you have to say. That is fucking hard.
Yeah.
It's not impossible. What is it? 99% of podcasters fail within the first 18 months,
Yep.
if not sooner. So you deserve a lot of credit for getting where you are. But as hard as it is for you, it's not any easier for bigger
I agree.
companies.
I agree.
And
But
so
then
how they choose to make their decisions, you may not agree with them. You may not.
Yeah.
And there's not unanimity in how big companies work on this topic. You keep on giving the same examples. There's not, which shows that, if those 4 companies or 5 or 10 companies are in the Fortune 500, there's 490 that you haven't mentioned, right? That may not feel the same way. It's hard. And so when you say, will I say something negative about them? No, it's hard.
All right. Again, to close this off, I would select based on merit and talent, and the thing we just talked about earlier. Countries like
all those companies.
Okay, but companies like Apple, Microsoft, it's Starbucks, etc., that set out these racial goals. If instead, if they had said we're going to cast a wider net and we want to make sure everyone is included and everyone is given a fair shake and a fair chance to be part of our company, and then you end up with 60% more black employees. Oh, great. Okay, all right. But not when you say we want to double our black workforce and now, okay, we've got it. That's the wrong premise to operate from. The premise should be equality of opportunity, not equality of racial representation or equality of outcomes, which is that's what that is.
I'll let you have almost the last word, but what I'm saying is, the numbers will be the numbers. If that's the wrong way to do it, and they're hiring incompetent people or less qualified people, it'll show up in the numbers. And again, now that we're going through an anti-DEI administration, the converse of those numbers should appear as well.
Yeah.
We should see all those mistakes that you feel these companies make reversing themselves. And so we'll know over time which is the right approach. Or it may well be that it was just virtue signaling and it didn't really change what they did. And they were always just hiring the most qualified people.
Yeah. No, yeah. All of that is totally possible. But I think
now
companies
you're agreeing with me. See, I got you to come around.
Except I don't think companies should be using race and gender as a proxy for diversifying.
There you go.
And finding better talent.
Don't
use race. Don't use race and gender.
Think that.
Okay, let's move on to the next thing. I'm gonna take a quick. Can we take a quick break? Then we'll hop back in.
Yeah.